Welcome, namaste, everyone. Thank you for rejoining me today for episode number 2 of the book we began last week, Aware in a World Asleep, a Principled Way for Living Spiritually. We got through that first one after a bout with the COVID. We'll see if my voice will allow me to do another one by one. Away we go. Okay. Episode 2 is entitled, How Has Life Gotten Me Here? The title of this chapter happens to be Chapter 2, suggests perhaps the most frequently expressed frustration of our times. It also implies that we are victims of life. How did I get to this? How is it that my life has taken so many crazy turns? Why are my relationships, both at work and in general, so dysfunctional? I'm sure you could suggest more than these, and even more personal in nature. The point is not the question so much. It is the cause that makes the questions pertinent at all. The questions are pertinent largely because we approach life unconsciously. At the very least, we are forgetful of our real essence and how we operate within that essence. I'll refrain from getting into being unconscious for now, for that is the focus of the first principle, which follows in the next chapter. What I will touch on instead could help explain how we got ourselves into this so-called mess in the first place. Right at the beginning, I want to dispel the mistaken notion that we have to undo all of our past, every discomforting incident and emotional trauma, before we can live a fruitful, happily fulfilled life now. Some psychological models would have us believe that we do. To be sure, some of us can benefit from a wise counselor who can help us see what pattern is keeping us from moving forward from the foundation of our own inner authority. Before we can realize this fully for ourselves, however, seeing that we are not all alone on the spiritual journey can relieve us of those deep inner feelings of loneliness. Indeed, we have plenty of company as we traverse this imaginary panoply of disarray. The most important thing for us to fully understand is that there's really nothing to get over. There's no thing to do away with in order to reach spiritual fulfillment. Any and all of those memories and impressions that distract us from living only in the depths of our hearts right now are from the past. They're no longer real, much like the images in a dream from yesteryear. So if they are no longer real, what's to give up? Nothing. No thing at all. Here is a hint about this that may surprise you. Years ago, during a special listening prayer session, I was clearly admonished to refrain from entertaining any and all memories, not just bad ones or nightmares, mind you, but even the good ones. This may sound strange, especially since the good ones often take us to some warm and fuzzy place, or are at least entertaining. That is precisely the point. They take us somewhere else, generally to some emotional feeling, and away from simply being in this, the present moment. Further to the point, even labeling memories as good or bad locks them in emotionally. The same is true for sad or pleasant memories alike, which instead each just is, no labels attached. Each takes us elsewhere, and that elsewhere loads us with some emotional reaction, which in return releases emotional chemistry associated with that memory in every cell of our body. It's akin to rehearsing any kind of event to which we have an emotional attachment, like a relational breakup, death of a loved one, moving into a new neighborhood, or leaving one's employment, even for an exciting new job. Every time we rehearse any of these attachments, the body responds by releasing the chemicals associated with the feelings held, and both the chemicals and feelings become trapped, for good or for ill. And once trapped, there is an occasional calling by an inner source to set them free. If we fail to respond properly and quickly, that failure restarts the emotional cycle through rehearsal again. Talk about being stuck in the past. Rehearse, rehearse, and rehearse some more. The point to be made is this. Just as the Master Jesus told us long ago, give it no thought. This means we should not go there except perhaps to acknowledge the memory briefly. However, acknowledging it does not mean we should entertain it or give it some power or strength it does not have by itself. Each memory has only the power and strength of feeling we give it, and that power is generated by how we think and feel about it. So, if you do not like how you feel, change your thought first. Then your feeling will be easier to lighten. Better yet, do not think at all. Simply listen to what the memory is telling you and let wisdom take over. More than likely, it will tell you that you are still rehearsing some associated feeling that needs letting go. So, let go already. The admonition to stop, look, and listen is a good one here. Stop to acknowledge the memory, sure. Look briefly at it so you can recognize it for what it is, simply a memory. And listen for that feeling. Then let go of it immediately before you reattach to it or label it emotionally. Certainly thank it because it was a gift. Then you can get on with living more and more completely in the now, listening for and acknowledging only the inner voice that speaks in and as the present, the real gift life is. Let this process be the training ground for all of life, for every distraction. What is the pearl here? The real pearl is that none of our past has any real influence on us unless we allow influence. Just forgive it all, give it all up, no matter what the distraction, and get on with real life, which means what's in front of your face right now. Spiritual fulfillment is stymied by vacillating between illusions of ego consciousness or duality and the truth of spiritual consciousness. Generally, we stay mired in confusion. The ego's way of maintaining control through fear and guilt. Living in the illusions of ego consciousness is much like an old movie revival. The script remains essentially the same, with only the actors changing. Based in ego consciousness, the storyline is one of endless physical and mental disarray, stress, frequent disappointment, and feelings of an existence lacking purpose and fulfillment. And we rehearse the storyline over and over and over again, until we can finally hear the inner calling tell us that the fictitious play needs to finish its run. Pull the curtain down and get on with it already. Spiritually, changing the script requires the understanding that the old one consists of memories continually repeated. By rehearsing these memories over and over, we make mythology real. Now we put the old script away, along with all the other illusions, never to return. By doing so, we are free to activate the actual truth found only within, and in each moment of now. In this way, we become the storyteller, producer, and director of our very own spiritual script. Life becomes so much better in the process. Actually, the process of spiritual unfoldment is life. Using a brief sports metaphor, changing our spiritual perspective on life is akin to asking a golf professional to improve your game. A good professional will not undo what he sees as wrong, even so much as draw attention to it. Instead, he establishes a new pattern for developing a new habit to replace the old, and encourages you to practice frequently until it becomes second nature. Funny thing is, as you begin to realize what's happening to your swing, insight and enlightenment bring forth the rightness of it for you. And then from then on, it becomes a focus only on listening within for that same experience of rightness, and forgetting about giving the swing any more thought. You don't need the details. We set aside the old way by giving our lives fully to the new. In living spiritually, the same kind of diligence is required, experiencing and demonstrating only the conscious awareness of wisdom delivered, as we acknowledge, "Here I am, Lord, speak and I will listen," and we hear in response, "Be still and know I am, Lord." Taking a few moments to review some of the common elements that appear to have cemented themselves in the realm of duality can be helpful in this regard. You will soon see that the feelings of pain and separation are the central pilings that undergird ego consciousness. Those very keys help us define our place in that fictional realm. In large part, it's precisely because we do have so much company that we stay trapped in the belief of ego consciousness. The weight of the false image of collective consciousness, and thus duality, is that heavy, that compelling, or so it seems at least. However, this is only in the realm of ego consciousness. When we see the futility of rendering your place in this realm from a more holistic point of view, you will finally have reached the point of declaring, "This is enough already." You come to the realization that you want something that is far more nourishing and fulfilling than illusory or dream imagery. It is then, and hopefully that moment is now, that you will decide to manifest life from an entirely different point of view. Becoming familiar with these distractions helps us to begin anew. We repent or reform the real meaning of being born again. In this case, being born again takes on the meaning of living by a new, completely different set of values. From a completely different foundation of life's meaning and purpose, we are propelled from the demeaning ways of ego consciousness into the lap of spiritual truth. We then live moment by moment, guided faithfully only toward our highest good. We will be fed continually by the bearings of the inner voice of wisdom, unleashed by the activation of conscious awareness we hold in common. I need a little sip of water. Excuse me for a moment. There we go. Sorry, hope I didn't gulp too loudly. Let us now get a taste of those things that seemingly force their way into our lives from a foundation of ego consciousness. Do your best to keep from intellectually and emotionally attaching yourself to them as you hear them. You will know you are detached from them when you no longer feel troubled by them. It is attachment that holds them dear, and it is by simple acknowledgement that you can let them go. Such detachment is like watching the space between thoughts instead of holding on to the thoughts themselves. For example, is troubled by thinking fearful thoughts about your children being out late at night? How do you feel when you let go of the fearful thoughts? I suspect you find that fear is not real and you worried for nothing at all. Worry and fret are fear-filled forms of thinking. They give credence to the admonition that we cannot improve our lives one cubit by thinking. Truth emanates from the stillness, while attachment infuses thoughts and feelings with disarray and tension. By exercising detachment from our thoughts and feelings, we will forgive them and release them into the ethers. With that letting go, we allow ourselves to also forget and release our old ways. In this one major shift, the meaning of forgive and forget is rendered complete in its spiritual correctness. We can forget that we thought opinions and beliefs to be helpful instead of spiritually limiting, relieving ourselves of any self-judgment along the way. We can now safely give them up completely. In case you do not fully understand detachment, let us instead use the idea of taking something seriously that has little, if any, real meaning for us. It is said that we entered the illusory world of duality when we took the idea of a life separate from divine consciousness seriously. The idea of a self apart from wisdom is something to be laughed at. It is absurd to take the height of vanity so seriously. When we take ourselves too seriously, we are so self-absorbed, so attached to our personal view of self, that we give meaning to the actions of others that was never intended, and the truth of the matter escapes us. One last admonition. As you saw earlier, everything we see outside us is a physical manifestation mirroring what is going on within us on the spiritual plane. If you want to see how cluttered your ideas about life are, for example, just look inside your car. What? You say? Yeah, just look inside your car. Is it cluttered and disheveled beyond measure, or clean and free of all debris? Our automobile is a metaphor for what array of beliefs and understandings is carrying or transporting us through this life. If we are in an inner state of disarray, it is likely some aspect of our outer condition will broadcast that to us. Are any of your closets cluttered to the hilt? Is your study heaped with collections of things that have absolutely no bearing on your current lifestyle? These are sure signs that it is time for an internal and external house cleaning. There is no room at the end for new guests spiritual consciousness has in store for you. They need space in which to flow and form, free from outside distraction. As we head into this list of seemingly important renderings from outside us, then, let us keep in mind that not only are they physical manifestations, they are also reflections of the current condition of our soul. I will point that out along the way so you can see for yourself how you can reframe your spiritual life. First, in the beginning. If one were stuck in ego consciousness, it would be easy to say that there are many influences on how we have come to think of ourselves. One of the earliest is the strong influence of parents and other family members on us when we were but a fetus in our mother's womb. From the point of view of ego consciousness and duality, the energy communicated in the environment surrounding us in that period of our lives had a direct impact on how we enter this world. If any of those we might call family had a negative attitude toward us as a potential child, we would have picked that up as a fetus. The same is true with positive energy or consciousness about such matters. As a fetus, and no less so as a mere child, we are like wet cement. All that falls on us makes some kind of impression. Everything that falls on us strikes our energetic field, our current level of conscious awareness, and begins to form our belief system, or continues to form it as well. These images are what thread the loom upon which we come to weave our existence on this plane. They come to color and decorate our world for better or for worse. Mostly the images litter life's landscape with the imagery of ego consciousness. On one level or another, we take on the imagery of them and me, and thus duality is there to greet us as we come out into the open. Beliefs and opinions found in ego consciousness affect the cellular level in ways that are strong and compelling. They remain so until we can restore the remembrance of our own divinity in their stead. Focusing on awareness alerts us to and erases the scales of such burnt offerings, much like a self-cleaning oven does. Here we find the meaning of Apostle Paul's reference that even when a child we thought as a child, but now we are adults and can instead think that way. When we are spiritually immature, no matter what our age, we take things personally and create separation out of them, a sure sign of duality. When spiritually mature, however, we take nothing personally, knowing that we are one with wisdom heard. It's just that some of us have forgotten that, even if only for the moment. And you know what happens when we forget it? We behave as though we're not wise or at one. We bring these energetic images into the world, and they color how we see life. You might even have come to see that how our family conducted its daily affairs must have been the right or only way to do so. After all, if it weren't right, why would it have been happening this way? The same can be said especially about how our parents related. As neophytes among seeming gods in the world of relationship, we could, take their model as one to be replicated. And replicate it we often do. It is such erroneous patterns that carry us forward as if they were the truth, but they are not really that. We only imagine them to be. For instance, the perception, Mom married Dad, so this is the kind of person that I too should marry, has many of us wedded to persons essentially like our father or mother. Such decisions might be okay for us, but usually they only carry the memory of the past forward. For some, the pattern is broken when they feel moved to meet real needs rather than serving the childhood mythology. Here's a personal example. I recall with indelible clarity an intimate conversation I had with a dear friend, I should say a dear late friend, who claimed she was having difficulty with her companion. When asked what was troubling her about him in a voice much like a child's, she declared with considerable consternation, "He's just not there for me." And then paused and followed with, "Just like Daddy wasn't there for me." Whoa. We examined her proclamation further and discovered that not only was he not there for her, but he had also served as a mirror to her for her to discover that she had not been there for him either. Even more importantly, however, using Byron Katie's work from Loving What Is, in turning around her view of it, she discovered that she had not been there for herself either. Indeed, by using the drama we have written for ourselves as a mirror for the condition of our spiritual vision, we can find much that can be shifted for the better. The lesson is to see our external life is not separate from our internal life because they clearly mirror each other. We construct these outward manifestations so we can reflect on them as an inward sign to be dealt with. Why? Because we've been avoiding it. Hello? An insightful way to comprehend this is to envision your image in a mirror. Envision an image of someone next to you in the mirror. Smudging your image in the mirror with layers of mud, mischaracterizing or smudging your image. Once you understand that the smudging is only what someone is doing to that reflection or image of you in his consciousness and not actually to you, you are freed from any suffering you might otherwise feel. After all, you are not merely someone else's image of you. You are, for real, a spiritual entity demonstrated individually. It is only when we see ourselves as a reflection of someone else's view of us that we take everything about that image personally. When we hold fast to the truth of our being instead, such generalizations and judgments fall aside out of their own nothingness. They, like the mud, are rinsed away by the waters of spiritual consciousness. It is this distance between illusion and spiritual reality that results in suffering. When living a lie instead of truth, we suffer. We suffer a sense of loss, feelings of desertion or abandonment. The feelings seem real when their real purpose is to point us to some inner issue we are having with our spiritual relationship, how we are relating to spiritual consciousness. If we feel abandoned, spiritually, it could well mean we are somehow abandoning spiritual awareness in favor of outside authority. We suffer until we reunite with the one and only, the inner voice that holds only our highest good for us. Then the longing found in disparity is released without penalty or event. We are freed as we reunite, free to be what we really are instead of what we have come to falsely believe about ourselves. In this freedom found in awareness, suffering ceases to exist. The same would apply in the suffering we feel when believing in lack. We suffer as we work ourselves to the bone to accumulate more personal, material wealth so we can feel somehow good enough. Momentarily, we do feel better about ourselves, and the temporary feeling of lack seems to disappear. Rest assured that this feeling of lack is sure to reappear time and time again until we fathom the real truth of the matter. security, or abundance is not found in the material world. A sense of lack is the distance we feel from our real identity, found only in the conscious awareness of the wisdom we are and are able to demonstrate. Either we honor the abundance we are, the security found only in communion with the truth of inner wisdom, or we honor external validation of feelings. Until we fully comprehend that only one really exists, we will try to find what we think is the real one by looking outside ourselves for our identity. But that is not where real identity can be found. How can identity be properly nestled in illusion? With such thinking as evidence, some would say our lives are inherited from our parents. What we have inherited is the propensity for rendering false images real. This pattern gives entry to the scriptural reference that the sins of our fathers are passed on to us. But the sin spoken of here is the memory of some erroneous pattern we carry that needs to be unsettled and replaced. Lest they become idols, these false images that parent untruth must simply be acknowledged in order to set them free. What is healed by the release is the way we have seen them. Then the truth we hear by stilling them can be worshipped in their wake. There is no room for both. Just as there is not wisdom and something else, there is no truth and error. Only one really exists. The other is imagined to be true. To believe otherwise is to relentlessly insist on and continue parenting or bringing to life further ideas of duality. These configurations of ego consciousness are what seem to capture our spirit. They serve in rendering us blind to the truth of our being. These, among others, work to distract us from living from our seat of spiritual consciousness. Living largely behind a veil of ego consciousness brings on or creates forgetfulness. Fixed there, we depend on those false memories or imaginary images we took on early in our lives. They further create or parent the ways we think, feel, or react or respond to what we believe life brings us. Only spiritual awareness can prompt needed change. Should we become aware of the need for the means, we can eventually see a clear spiritual path and walk in it with our head held high. From the reference of ego consciousness, if we feel we have been abandoned by our father or mother, we will extend those feelings experienced as pain and suffering into our daily lives on many levels. It doesn't matter whether the sense of abandonment is emotional or physical, whether as a fetus or beyond. As long as we stay, as long as we stay attached to those feelings and images, it is those that will affect how we deal with others. To the degree we feel some reconnection to the fear of abandonment happening yet again, we are bound to repeat them in our relationships. The feelings of fear seem to paralyze us, as well as the potential for healthy relationships. Unless we deal with them, we become socially crippled by them and are never able to have healthy relationships with much of anyone. When we do face such emotional changes, they can alert us to erroneous levels of consciousness. If we then look at them spiritually, we come to see that the real abandonment we fear is from our real self. Our real self, not our real self. Oh boy. When acknowledged and accepted, such awareness takes us to a deeper comprehension of how our fear images have clouded the truth from view. We make a significant breakthrough into spiritual presence. From this newfound perch of spiritual surety, we are freed to move on to other aspects of the same treasure trove. Once blind, we now can see. Once crippled, we can now cast our various emotional crutches aside and are free to walk unaided in our truth. To risk redundancy here, none of this history matters. The only thing that matters relates to our one and only purpose, to become aware and activate the spiritual truth heard in the inner voice of wisdom. Becoming adept at this will render all the rest unnecessary. That which parents only truth is what animates me spiritually. What else could possibly matter in this world of ours? Excuse me. Sip of water helps. Delivered into ego consciousness. Moving beyond parental influence, we find a wide array of mental configurations imposed on us from the collective weight of mass belief and opinion. From the standpoint of a belief in duality, we could speak about birth and death, for example. Some call this the definition of unconsciousness because, mired in it, we forget the eternality and immortality of the divine consciousness we are. In the spiritual or metaphysical tongue, however, we never refer to birth and death, for neither the spiritual nor the metaphysical is measured or defined physically. The terms spiritual and metaphysical refer only to eternal life, meaning that divine idea or conscious awareness of wisdom and the spiritual meaning of life are eternal. The only thing wisdom gives birth to is an infinite stream of inspirational ideas, often referred to as divine inspiration, even grace. I like grace. Thus, the inspirational ideas available to us are eternal and infinite, just as they are omniscient, omnipotent, omnipresent, and ever active. The only thing that dies is an old belief or opinion, suddenly replaced by a newborn inspiration. All the rest of life is the outcome of divine ideas consciously demonstrated. Now that we have come to know the real meaning of life, we can affirm that physical death has no place in it. To believe otherwise is to affirm a belief in separation from our divine essence, and that duality is real. That would be to construct and live from yet another dualistic element, one to falsely worship. To top that, we find the real meaning of death by looking closely at life itself. Real life is nothing but conscious awareness of divine essence. Wisdom, the only truth for us. Being no thing but inspirational ideas, where might the meaning of death be found? Divine consciousness exists eternally. If not found in life, where must we find the idea of death? Only in the illusions contained in duality, the netherworld or dream fantasia. As we know by now, these fail the test of spiritual truth. Briefly, I will add another layer for your consideration. The death we dread is merely a metaphor for our misunderstanding that ideas fade away, seemingly to die. We are hardly versed in looking inward for the truth of the matter, so when we feel like something is dying, even to the degree we are indeed, some idea of us is dying, about to be let go. It is that first clear sense of death that alerts us to the fact that change is on its way. Spiritually, that is. Yet because we are not usually aware of this phenomenon, we misinterpret it to mean we're dying physically. I speak from authority of personal experience in this regard, so I can put you on guard as fair warning. Do not panic about feelings related to death, or even about being given a death sentence in health terms. Its spiritual meaning is that some idea of you or another you have erroneously taken on from outer authority is about to leave. Indeed, you will be transcending beyond it soon, to be resurrected into a new life, absent the old configuration of error. Relying on fear, the ego or duality is based on the elements of difference and separation. It relies on these elements for its very existence, accompanied by feelings of guilt, of course. No matter whether we are speaking about relationships or a sense of power and achievement, these naturally come into play. Of course, it follows that if we are feeling guilty, we think we must be punished. Such strong feelings are false images, yet we feel we must deal with them. They feel too difficult and too painful to deal with inwardly, so we project them out onto the screen of our dream world. Thus, when feeling separate, we strive for relationships. We think we can fix that feeling for us, and that can make us feel we are more complete and win for us some magical way of living. Unfortunately, for the most part, just the opposite happens. At the end of the relational rainbow, we find no pot of gold, not even the bright colors that drew our attention in the first place. Instead, we find darkness illustrated by bare existence. We feel incomplete, hollow, unfulfilled, and without purpose. The magical cure we thought has not worked, characterized by infatuation with material collections, including the collections of past lovers, jobs, locations, and disappointments, all subtle forms of punishment we inflict on ourselves, and all out of a belief in the self that is separate from our innate state, our innate essence, separate from what we really are. It is from the same feeling of separation that has us competing for all we are worth, just so we can feel worthy in some way. Much of the time we compete just to knock someone down so we can finally feel good enough by falsely elevating ourselves. One day, when more aware, we find that the only place we can find our sense of completeness and of being good enough is in spiritual truth. Only under that government can we live in the freedom that comes to us from faithfully exercising inspirational truth. This awareness is the beginning of a marvelous walk home to the only location of purpose and fulfillment. Interestingly, when feeling homeless, even when acting homelessness out in daily life, what's really happening is that we are exchanging objects of sense for quality of soul. Feeling that materialistic life is not where it's at, we give way to living without any collections whatsoever. We make our home through attachment to nothing at all, sensing that this is a better quality of life than the material. When one comes to see that the new outer condition now reflects a longing for soul in place of the material, this spiritual awareness frees them up to return to the only real home there is, one's inner truth, heard in the still, small voice. The profound calling to come home is one that scares ego consciousness to death, and it begins to feel like death to us. Actually, this feeling is the beginning of the end of the powerful influence false beliefs and opinions have on us. It is not about the illusions they are, but at the power we have given to these illusions. This comes about mostly as a result of the outward influence of mass false belief in them. Know this for certain, ego consciousness is not the way Jesus spoke of when he said, "I am the way, the truth, and life." Neither is it the path through the eye of the needle that sews a seamless garment of truth for us. In reality, neither ego consciousness nor duality is a real path at all. They're only erroneous ideas believed in. Indeed, to believe Jesus meant that he as a person is the way, the truth, and life is to pair duality with truth. No, it is exercising conscious awareness of inner wisdom that is the single way, the only truth, and one life for all. When we comprehend these admonitions spiritually, we come to know that this is the truth of which Jesus spoke. In this fierce state, the illusory voice of duality would tempt us, bargain with us, flatter us, and bribe us, wanting survival in return. One way you can be sure duality exists as a counter-influence is that its ways appear more and more regularly in everyday existence. It is quite simple to discern, really. If you find these false images in your face, you can be sure it is ego trying to retain your loyalty in the only ways it has available. The good news is that your increased awareness of this false imagery is a sure sign you are readily moving into the one and only divine awareness. Use these signs then to point you precisely and only in that direction to the place of divine being. The scriptural reference here is when Jesus was tempted by the ego, called evil or the devil, the temptress by some, for those 40 days and nights in the desert. Jesus dealt with his demons first by recognizing them and denying them access. He turned them away. "Get thee behind me, Satan." Then, after he recognized the subtle and not so subtle advances for what they were, he simply walked away from them, onto the path where only inner truth prevails. From then on, it was this path of oneness that he traveled. How much more evidence do we need in order to understand that admonition? This one, that is. It is not I, but the Father within that speaks, that does these things. Again, in the tongue we now speak, the silent language of divine consciousness expressed, the declaration sounds like this: "It is not I, but my awareness of the divine wisdom within it speaks, that activates life for me." Add to that, I can of my own self do nothing, and we see that Jesus' teachings are perfect. They attribute all activation of truth to the conscious awareness of and commitment to the demonstration of wisdom, the inward way. It is a life of active awareness that parents or fathers real life into activation. Indeed, inspiration breathes spiritual meaning into life. If we are to follow Jesus' stunning revelations, the path we are to tread is one of obedience and surrender to those very same truths. Life can never be the same when we experience this. Even if the expressions only symbolically represent a certain level of consciousness of which we are to become aware, the intent of allegorical meaning is clear. We thus can abort any need to find out whether the Bible is literally true or simply a collection of allegories that lead us to truth. We cannot see the face of God and live, we are told. The spiritual reality of this expression is that once we see the face of God, that is, consciously experience the truth of wisdom as a spiritual path, we can no longer live in the false belief in ego or mass consciousness. We will have found our home in and as the truth we find there. The truth represented is so profoundly evident that obedience or surrender to it is the only natural response. No longer does the ego form of duality exist, neither does the false idea of choice that comes with it. Let this meditation of the story of Jesus put you on notice that truth spoken is the journey here. In Jesus' own words, he came not to change Scripture, but to mediate it. He treated it in the way it was intended, as spiritual, as the one and only idea of spiritual consciousness, and thus divine order. The infinitude of spiritual ideas contained in wisdom renders the letter or literal meaning of the law as the illusion found in outer authority. As you see other references to Jesus' words, you will hold them in the same context, your view of life, and never again be the same. Grace will have set you free from past misunderstandings that no longer serve you. Getting a little long here, but we're going to continue. Let's hold on to this thread. We have nothing to fear but fear itself. A rather familiar phrase, for sure, at least if you're anywhere near my age. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt had it right when he uttered these words long ago at a time of war. The force that keeps us captive, clouds us from the high road upon which we are meant to tread, is the huge influence of fear. Fear of both failure and even success. Fear of becoming aware of our true selves. Fear of all those yesterdays repeating themselves today or in some imagined future. Fear of the ideas of both life and death. Fear that we will be abandoned. Fear of lack. On and on the list goes, seemingly forever. These are typical of the ways of belief in ego and mass consciousness holds us prisoner to fear. Fear is what keeps us in debilitating jobs or relationships, what seems to make us give up our souls to others, what cripples us from moving forward, holds us in some form of current dysfunction, or sends us backward even into our equally dysfunctional past. Fear is a killer. which brings increased levels of tension into our lives. In the life of ego consciousness, it is that very tension which shifts our bodily chemistry for the worse. And from bad chemistry comes disease in the human realm. This bad chemistry that emanates from fear, worry, angst, and other fearful emotions is opposed to the peace of mind found only in our spiritual core. It's important to remember that each time we rehearse a debilitating story or unfounded fear, we are reinforcing the chemistry that comes from it. Thus, the toxicity trapped in our physical structure grows and is reinforced. The key then is to release it by giving it no thought whatsoever, no matter how it shows up. Simply acknowledge it, thank it, bid it farewell, and then go on living what you know to be true, but living nothing but that truth. Quoting from an earlier work that came through me, re-paragraphed now by me, the creation spirit expressing your divinity in everyday life, this is what comes of a belief in fear. You can also come to our understanding of the purity of loving by perception of that which does its best to keep us from loving, fear. Fear seems to have power over us. It can render us so-called insane. Fear is the greatest of demons. In all kinds of insidious ways, fear keeps us from moving forward. Fear seduces us into staying in places and relationships that are no longer appropriate for us, even if they were appropriate in the first place. Fear keeps us from telling the truth to both ourselves and to others. It blocks us from standing up to bullies and others who abuse us. It keeps us in jobs that have long since passed their usefulness. It keeps us from even the simplest decisions for fear of being wrong or right. Fear keeps us from acting in the simplicity of kindness, fearing we will be stepped on, abandoned, or rejected yet one more time. Prolonged, suppressed fear turns into anger, then depression, sending us to our real or imagined bed, and escape from the decisions and changes we must face within ourselves. Eventually, it can even coax us to end life in this body. Fear blinds us, cripples us. It makes us think we're going crazy. Fear deadens our spirit. Fear is a killer. Relationally, it keeps us from dealing justly with ourselves and with others. Fear, the cleverest and most powerful weapon of mortal mind, that is, the ego, keeps us from our truth, from living authentically and genuinely as the true self we are, from being authentically loving. It is in oneness and not fear that we come to at last fulfill the sacredness of human dignity. Such a summary renders fear as the ego-like villain it is. A belief in ego consciousness is filled with such villains, mostly thinly disguised impostors like doubt and angst, yet all are fear-related, to be sure. What is the way out of this fix we seem to be in? As Joe Goldsmith puts it, nothingize it. Make nothing out of each ego-conscious thought that comes into view, for each is founded in some erroneous belief or opinion. Thus, ego-conscious thought is nothing, no thing at all, only a figment of our waking dream world. In the Gospel of John, Jesus said this to us about fear: "Let your heart not be troubled, neither let it be afraid." Could there be a more powerful entreaty than this to point out that the very fear we feel permeating ego consciousness is to be avoided at all costs, and if not, that our hearts will be troubled? Yes, it is this same troubled heart that is our cue and clue to remember, yet again, to return to the awareness of our one and only truth. "To thy own self be true," Shakespeare told us. It is an admonition we might use to our spiritual advantage and to help form our legacy. Eventually, we come to the realization that our real task as the tentative holders of a belief in ego-conscious model is to overcome the unreality of fear, and then we do what we must out of the truth of our being. By overcoming our belief in fear, we will have put behind us the illusory idol of Satan. Once the veil has been cleared, real life unfolds before us. Suddenly we see the truth of our being, which necessitates that we live from nothing other than that. We finally become aware that there is nothing else to be expressed. By now you may well have come to the identical conclusion that I have about fear. When we experience life unconsciously or out of a belief in ego consciousness, fear is the director of the never-ending play we call drama. Drama comes in all sizes, shapes, and colors. Of this we can be sure. As a perfect reflection of our belief in ego consciousness, drama is never-ending. As a matter of fact, when you see someone in the midst of drama or calling drama to themselves on a regular basis, this is most assuredly a sign that belief in ego consciousness is at work. Some might not agree with this characterization, perhaps because they are blinded by the inherent qualities of ego consciousness, separation, and fear. Do you mean to tell me that an empty existence filled only with a compelling sense of separation and fear is not drama waiting for the curtain to rise? It is likely that most of us do not think we are living one drama after another, simply because many of the dramas surface quickly and effortlessly and are gone as soon as we see the unnatural disturbance in them. As soon as this untoward appearance begins to surface, those who are more aware turn to the high road, walking around the impending drama to inner peace on the other side. This takes courage to see the difference between drama and inner peace, and it takes obedience or surrender to walk around potential drama to the truth of the matter, despite the tugs of the past habits. Drama is a debilitating influence. It tends to pull down anyone who attaches himself to any of the attendant roles. Drama's purpose, just as it is for the belief in ego consciousness, what parents it, is to pull any who participate down to its own lowly level. It's the only way someone who is embroiled in drama can get any sense of worth, a glimpse of importance, some attention, or feeling of equality. So be aware of what is happening around you, and even more important, do what's happening within you. When you have some sense that the drama pot is heating up, it's a sure sign to back up and gain another more wholesome perspective, which will turn the stove of ego consciousness off so you can cool down. I hope it is now clear to you that dramas are something to gain your attention, whether it is one brewing in you or someone else. The good news in this is that dramas are a clear indication of ego consciousness at work, and they can point us, when we are aware, to the need for remembering the truth of our being, dish the dramas, and go inward. Again, if we stay aware, we can easily see when and how this insidious belief in ego consciousness is operating. Each time we can say with abundant clarity and the power of truth, "Get thee behind me, Satan." Divine consciousness is the only wisdom I worship. There is no other. As we continue this journey together, we'll see how the following principles work to this spiritual end. Okay, I'm checking here. We're going to go a rather long way. Wow. Okay, where we deal with the implications of technology and how it pulls us away from listening, being aware inwardly. For sure, we all engage in it. Religious dogmestication, that is, various aspects of religion pull us in one direction or another, wanting us to believe that it is the truth, rather than leading us inward for the truth that's found only there. Let's see. As we begin to replace these shop-worn images, which have virtually guaranteed our current place in a largely dysfunctional society, with our truth, we come to reflect what conscious awareness of wisdom inspires in us. The more we become aware of our truth and practice it, the more our heart opens to the kingdom that is our inheritance. Actually, the kingdom of divine inspiration found in wisdom is our inherent nature. All this good awaits our awareness and activation. As with all that seems to trouble us in the world of appearance, pay those things outside of our inner awareness no mind. Give it no thought. Only commune in secret with the seed of wisdom you are sure to find in your inner closet, shutting the door to all else behind you. The all else behind you consists of those shop-born beliefs and opinions that no longer apply. Only truth applies now. Okay, folks, that's a little bit lengthy today, about 55 minutes, but I think it's well worth it. It's one of those things when you say, well, how far are we going to go? How far are we going to go? How far are we going to go? Until we stop. That's why. You know, I like to end each week with just a little bit of a post that I've seen here, there, or wherever, as a way of leaving you with a nugget to take to chew on between now and next week when we meet again. And here's this one. You can't keep getting mad at people for sucking the life out of you if you keep giving them the straw. Oh, what an admonition that is. Throw the straws away, folks. Throw the straws away. I hope you stay well and happy between now and when we meet again next week. Know that you are loved beyond measure, for sure, by many around you you're not even aware of yet, but it is there. It is there for sure. Okay, folks, namaste. I love you.